Now that Obama is leaving office, we are hearing a lot of chatter about his legacy. From healthcare to LGBT and climate change, Democrats and liberals are applauding Obama's 8 long years as president. But they are saying little about his foreign policy track record and his cozy relationship with the merchants of death. Obama was a blessing for the military-industrial complex. He broke all records. He more than doubled the total spent during the Bush administration.
Well, I was astonished in researching the article that Obama had sold this much. I mean, I knew there were record deals with the Saudis, but to outsell the 8 years of Bush, to sell more than any president since World War II, was surprising even to me, who follow these things quite closely. The majority, 60%, have gone to the Persian Gulf and Middle East, and within that, the Saudis have been the largest recipient of things like U.S. fighter planes, Apache attack helicopters, bombs, guns, almost an entire arsenal they've purchased just in the last few years.
Beginning in 2009, Obama approved armed deals worth $200 billion, more than any other president since World War II. Most of the approved weapons are going to Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Australia, Iraq, and Israel. The Pentagon's Defense Security Cooperation Agency has estimated that it facilitated $46 billion in arms sales in 2015 and more than $40 billion in 2016. Both Democrats and Republicans support a continuation of the global sale of arms. Bill Clinton oversaw the export of $67.3 billion worth of armaments, a full 55% of global arms exports, quadruple the share of the next closest competitor. In 1997, the United States sold arms or provided military training to 21 of 24 countries engaged in a major armed conflict at that time. This reversed a trend in arms sales reductions started in the 1980s, after more than a decade of the Nixon Doctrine, when weapons sales were used by the United States to influence foreign governments. The Nixon Doctrine opened the floodgates of military sales and aid to U.S. allies in the Persian Gulf. Although Jimmy Carter said during his campaign in 1976 he would cut military spending and reduce arms sales, he increased them. In 1979, he laid out a policy that pushed defense spending over $200 billion within 5 years. The George W. Bush administration continued escalating arms sales. When he first took office, Bush appointed 32 executives, paid consultants, and major shareholders of weapons contractors to top policy-making positions in the Pentagon, the National Security Council, and the State Department. Contracts to the Pentagon's top 10 contractors jumped from $46 billion in 2011 to $80 billion in 2003, an increase of nearly 75%. Halliburton's contracts jumped more than 9 times their 2001 levels by 2003, from $400 million to $3.9 billion. Northrop Grumman's contracts doubled from $5.2 billion to $11.1 billion. The nation's largest weapons contractor, Lockheed Martin, saw a 50% increase from $14.7 billion to $21.9 billion. In 2008, during his first visit to Saudi Arabia, Bush announced an arms deal worth $20 billion. The package included so-called smart bombs and JDAMs, or Joint Direct Attack Munitions. 2008 was the last time the sale of arms to Saudi Arabia was less than $1 billion in a given year. The total value of U.S. arms sales delivered to Saudi Arabia from 2009 to 2014 was $13 billion, the largest of any country in the world during that time period. During his 8 years in office, Obama planned to sell $115 billion worth of weapons to Saudi Arabia.
U.S. President Barack Obama's administration has so far offered Saudi Arabia over $115 billion in arms and military training. That's according to a report by U.S.-based think tank, the Center for International Policy. The weapons offers are the largest any U.S. government has ever made during the 71-year U.S.-Saudi alliance. The offers have been made to Saudi Arabia since Obama took office in January 2009. They include a broad range of weaponry, including tanks, attack helicopters, air-to-ground missiles, missile defense ships, and warships.
The Saudis requested the sale to replenish its stockpile depleted during the illegal war in Yemen. The sale included a variety of weapons, including more than 150 M1A2 Abrams battle tanks. Sales to the Saudis over the span of Obama's time in office include combat aircraft, attack helicopters, bombs, air-to-ground missiles, warships, and military training. The defense contractor Northrop Grumman cashed in on the deal. It received $4 billion from the Saudis for a train and equip program for the Saudi Arabian National Guard, which played a key role in the Yemen intervention. The Senate was fully on board with the sale despite human rights violations by the Saudis in Yemen. It voted 71 to 27 against a resolution to block the sale. The bill was introduced by Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul and Democrat Chris Murphy of Connecticut.
Aerial attacks by the Saudi-led coalition have already caused immense carnage and destroyed much of the country's medical facilities and other vital civilian infrastructure.
So now we are facing a situation where, by many reports from Amnesty and Human Rights Watch and Oxfam, we are dealing in Yemen with a catastrophic humanitarian situation that are 80% of Yemen population are in need of humanitarian assistance.
The Saudi-led effort to destroy Shia Houthi rebels in Yemen with U.S. weapons has so far resulted in at least 10,000 dead, 370,000 children malnourished, and 10,000 more dead of preventable disease. Nearly 3 million Yemenis have been displaced from their homes. In August, the death toll was so high the International Committee of the Red Cross took the unusual step of donating entire morgue units to Yemeni hospitals. The same month, Doctors Without Borders announced it would leave the country after the Saudis bombed hospitals.
What we can confirm is that this is a trend that is happening more and more in the last few months, and that's delivering essential medical and humanitarian assistance in Yemen, as in other countries, is becoming almost impossible.
The Saudi-led coalition has also routinely bombed marketplaces and funeral homes. In October, the Saudis used a U.S.-manufactured 500-pound bomb on a funeral procession, killing 150 people and wounding over 500.
They'd gathered at Sanaa's Al-Kobra Hall for a funeral, but in Yemen, even those who mourn are in the firing line. The Saudi-led coalition airstrike tore through this place. For many of those inside, there was no escape. The scale of casualties has left Yemen in shock.
In 2015, Obama said the U.S. would provide logistical and intelligence support to the Saudis. It also began aerial refueling of Saudi aircraft. Human Rights Watch said evidence shows the Saudis are using U.S.-supplied cluster bombs that are outlawed in much of the world. The cluster bombs are manufactured by TEXTRON Systems in Wilmington, Massachusetts. Despite the slaughter in Yemen, the U.S. continues to sell weapons to Saudi coalition partners. In December, the Department of Defense approved the sale of helicopters and missiles to the United Arab Emirates and Morocco. The United Arab Emirates and the Obama administration shipped illegal weapons to jihadists in Libya during the NATO war to overthrow and murder Gaddafi. A leaked email revealed a senior Emirate diplomat admitting his country violated the United Nations Security Council resolution on Libya. The UAE spent billions of dollars purchasing U.S. weapons. In 2013, it requested permission to buy guided bombs and cruise missiles. Its Air Force has bought Apache helicopters and F-16 fighter jets. The country has worked with Eric Prince, formerly of Blackwater. In 2010, they teamed up to train a secret army of Colombian and South African mercenaries. Outside the Middle East, the Obama administration signed off on arms deals to a number of countries, including Taiwan, India, South Korea, and Vietnam. Since the 1980s, the United States has sold billions of dollars worth of military equipment to South Korea. The sales include fighter jets, aircraft spare parts, and air-to-air missiles. In December, the Obama administration formally notified Congress of a $1.83 billion arms sale package for Taiwan.
The U.S. just authorized this deal, but Congress approved it more than a year ago. The package includes 2 frigates, anti-tank missiles, amphibious assault vehicles, and some other equipment as well.
Well, Bruce, China considers Taiwan a renegade province, and the U.S. has just given it more weapons. How does this bode for U.S.-China relations?
The U.S. said that it's not changing what it calls its one China policy. And now that means that the U.S. will still not recognize Taiwan as an independent state. But Obama approved the deal anyway because Washington does believe Taiwan should have a credible defense under a nearly 40-year-old act which defines relations with authorities in Taipei.
The State Department said Raytheon and Lockheed Martin were the main contractors in the sales.
President Barack Obama announced Monday that the U.S. is fully lifting the decades-long ban on sales of lethal weapons to Vietnam. The announcement is a big shift in U.S. policy and comes after Obama began a 3-day visit to Vietnam.
Last May, during a trip to Vietnam, Obama announced the lifting of a ban on the sale of lethal military equipment. The ban was put into place in response to Vietnam's human rights record. Vietnam stands accused of holding prominent political prisoners and beating protesters. Vietnam argues it needs the weapons to defend itself against China. In 2014, China placed an oil rig in waters near the Parcel Islands, which Vietnam claims. The lifting of the embargo on Vietnam and the sale of weapons to Taiwan are likely to increase tensions in the disputed South China Sea. In 1934, the Nye Commission, also known as the Special Committee on Investigation of the Munitions Industry, held hearings to investigate financial and banking interests and the role they played in starting the First World War. Many Americans believe the U.S. entered the war at the behest of bankers in the munitions industry. The commission questioned more than 200 witnesses, including J.P. Morgan Jr. and Pierre DuPont. The Senate cut off funding in 1936 after Nye accused the late former President Woodrow Wilson of withholding essential information from Congress as it considered a declaration of war against Germany. Although the commission failed to implicate bankers in the munitions industry in a conspiracy to start the First World War for profit, it did bolster the anti-war and anti-interventionist movements at the time. The public's attitude towards war and foreign intervention was reflected in a book written by Smedley Butler, retired United States Marine Corps Major General and 2-time Medal of Honor recipient. Butler argues industrialists subsidized by U.S. taxpayers make large profits on war and human suffering. Death and calculated mass murder are good for business. This principle was demonstrated in the 1980s when the Reagan administration sold weapons to the Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein. Donald Rumsfeld traveled to Iraq to make sure the Iraqi dictator received what he needed in order to win a war between Iraq and Iran, a war that would ultimately cost more than 1 million lives and end in stalemate. President Reagan sent Hussein a secret message saying the United States would support his effort in the war. CIA Director Casey wanted to give Saddam cluster bombs. In 1982, Reagan legalized direct military sales to Iraq. The Reagan and Bush administrations subsequently signed off on more than $1 billion in military assistance. Between 1985 and 1989, the U.S. Department of Commerce licensed 70 biological exports to Iraq, including at least 21 batches of lethal strains of anthrax. The French newspaper Le Figaro, in an article published in 1998, said researchers at the Rockville, Maryland lab of the American Type Culture Collection confirmed sending anthrax samples by mail order to Iraq. After the Gulf War, Iraq told UN weapons inspectors about how they had weaponized anthrax sent to them by the American corporation. In 1985, the U.S. Centers of Disease Control sent samples of an Israeli strain of West Nile virus to a microbiologist at the Basra University in Iraq. In addition, Iraq received other various toxins and bacteria, including botulins and E. coli. Corporations that have sold dual-use chemicals and biological samples to Iraq for its weapons program include Phillips Petroleum, Unilever, Acolac, Allied Signal, the American Type Culture Collection, and Teledyne. Teledyne pled guilty to charges of criminal conspiracy, false statements, and violations of the Export Administration Act and the Arms Export Control Act for indirectly exporting 130 tons of zinchromium to Iraq through Chilean arms manufacturer Carlos Carlodén. The zinchromium was intended for use in cluster bombs. In defense, Teledyne argued during the trial that the CIA had authorized the shipments. George W. Bush would later use Iraq's possession of these chemicals, biological agents, and munitions as evidence Saddam Hussein was a threat not only to his neighbors, but also the United States and the world at large. In 2005, the Commission on Intelligence Capabilities of the United States regarding weapons of mass destruction reported that the intelligence community was dead wrong in its assessment of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. Bush's invasion ultimately resulted in the death of more than 1.5 million Iraqis. The merchants of death have reaped tremendous profits from the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, and also the war on terror. In 2000, the U.S. defense budget was approximately $312 billion. By 2011, the figure had grown to $712 billion. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute estimates that between 2002 and 2011, arms sales among the top 100 companies grew by 51%. Obama has continued and expanded the war on terror, from the destruction of Libya to fueling the effort to take down Bashar al-Assad in Syria. Lockheed Martin CEO Marilyn Hewson said in July the U.S. effort to exacerbate and spread conflict is good for business. She said conflicts in both the Middle East and Asia would make them growth areas for the foreseeable future. The new president will continue the process. During the campaign, Trump promised to expand the military. He suggested repealing the current defense sequester, increasing the size of the Army by more than 500,000 active duty soldiers, and also rebuilding the Navy with a goal of 350 ships, providing the Air Force with 1,200 fighter jets, building a missile defense system, and emphasizing cyber warfare. Although Trump is portrayed as an anti-establishment politician, when it comes to an obscenely bloated defense budget and continued goodies for the death merchants, he is little different than his predecessors.
For just a small subscription fee, you can become a member of the Newsbud community and help keep this website running. Your subscription will provide you with full community access to exclusive content, including videos and articles from Newsbud's team of experts and analysts, as well as a members-only monthly newsletter from Newsbud's founder, Sibel Edmonds. Sign up today for full access at newsbud.com.